welcome again on behalf of Refugee Law Project to all of you here this morning, both here in the room and online. We're really exploring what does it mean to do blended work. So the title of my presentation today is From Gendered to Gender Just, Access to Justice. Black Lives Matter has raised a global and increasingly an evidenced discussion about racialized justice, or more accurately, injustice. Unhappily, it remains the case, particularly but not only in America, that if you are black, you are more likely to be killed by the forces of law and order than if you are white. You're also more likely to be charged with certain crimes and to be incarcerated by the justice system, probably for longer and with less likelihood of being released on parole. At the same time, if you are a white policeman with a taste for brutalizing those of a different race, your sentence will be lighter than if you had brutalized someone of your own race in the same way. In short, access to justice is highly racialized. Would anybody contest that summary, or that very summarized description of racialized justice? I hope not, because I think it kind of captures the key point. What I want us to consider today, and what we want this panel to also reflect on, is the ways in which, just as justice and our access to it is racialized, it is also gendered. In other words, our access to justice is determined, at least in part, by our gender. Put simply, just as access to justice is different by race, it is also different by gender. As an organization for which the promotion of access to justice in general, and within refugee and forced migration settings specifically, is a core activity, the current gendered nature of access to justice is a matter of significant concern and ever-evolving exploration. My task this morning is to set out what we see as some of the key parameters in thinking our way through that, and why the current state of the current gendered access to justice situation matters for the future of refugee management, as well as for individual and social well-being more broadly. Looking first at complainants. Do women complainants get listened to in the same way as men when they go to the police, when they appear in court, when they pursue traditional conflict resolution? Do women get a proper hearing when it comes to land disputes? What about marriage and divorce? What about inheritance? How about equal opportunity and equal pay in employment? On the other hand, do men get a proper hearing when it comes to matters related to conscription to armed forces? What witness protection measures exist for male victims of sexual violence? And when we come to people who identify as LGBTQ, do they get a proper hearing on any of the above matters? I think you will probably, I hope, agree with me that the answer to all the above is almost always a resounding no. Women do not get a proper hearing on very many specific issues. Men do not get a proper hearing on other issues. LGBTQ people do not get a proper hearing on pretty much any of them. The system, the justice system, differentiates gender by gender who gets to pursue justice for which issues. What about the defendants? Are women or men more likely to get bail We shall watch a film about that in a moment. Police bond. Will defendants, if they're male or female or LGBTQ, will they get charged with the same offense? If they are charged with the same offense, will they spend the same amount of time on remand, regardless of their gender? Will the same arrangements be put in place, regardless of whether they are a mother or a father? I'm not going to dive into the answers to those questions because my colleagues on the panel, I know, are going to give us a lot of very concrete examples of the imbalances that I'm just drawing our attention to. If we turn to the agents of justice, those entrusted with delivering justice for victims, for complainants, and for state and society more broadly, are the traditional and cultural leaders who mediate at so many disputes at village level, are they gender balanced? In the refugee setting, are the refugee welfare committees gender balanced? We know from our work, which is supported by UN Women, that they're absolutely not. And that it's not simply a matter of putting some extra female bodies onto a committee and then you have gender balance. There's a whole process involved. Agents of justice. Are the police gender balanced? Prisons. Is prisons gender balanced? Immigration. Are they gender balanced? If you arrive at a border, who is going to meet with you? Further along the process, the judiciary. Is it representative? Does it represent the full range of gender identities? How many principal judges have been female in Uganda? How many LGBTQ judges are there? Personally, I only know of one, Justice Edwin Cameron in South Africa, who's internationally recognized for his contribution to the post-apartheid settlement. And what about the legal fraternity? I mentioned this on Monday. Even the word fraternity gives us the answer. Fraternity is a brotherhood. A sorority is a sisterhood. So we talk about, generally, the phrase is the legal fraternity. So already we know the answer. The legal fraternity is dominated by men. And why don't we problematize that? Why do male lawyers, by and large, think that they will only be regarded as successful lawyers if they pursue certain avenues such as corporate law and leave the more caring and compassionate dimensions of human rights lawyering to be taken care of by women lawyers? I think it's clear that there's a bit of an issue here when we look at the so-called gender binary. Men and women access and deliver justice differently. Their pathways are different, and their end destinations are correspondingly different. And people described as LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, barely have a pathway, let alone a destination in the justice systems that we know. But let me complicate it further for the purposes of our overall theme, the future of refugee management in the Great Lakes region. What is lesson number one in any gender studies course any of us has ever attended? If I were allowed to guess, I would say it is the statement that gender is a construct. It is something that society as a whole actively builds or constructs, a process in which, in one way or another, each of us individually also participates. I find it helpful to clarify what we mean by gender is constructed in terms of asking what are the building blocks out of which society constructs our gender identity. The majority of people will immediately point to biological sex, and the string of characteristics that are assumed to correspond to your biological sex. Notably, there's a very widely held assumption that men are biologically stronger than women, and therefore they should do certain things and women should do other things. But it's not just biological sex. Skin color, as Black Lives Matter makes clear. Your skin color makes a huge difference to what treatment you get in many situations and many societies. Religion. Are Christian men and women and Muslim men and women seen as having exactly the same model of masculinity and femininity? What about nationality? Is gender in America the same as in Britain, in Uganda, in Africa, in Europe? Sexual orientation. Are gay people with male genitalia still seen as men? Are lesbian people with female genitalia still seen as women? Do LGBTQ people, refugees, get the same treatment as heterosexual refugees? What about age? Age plays a huge role in what we expect from one another, even within our accepted gender norms. What you expect of me with my silver hair compared to what you used to expect of me when it wasn't silver yet is probably a bit different. So age and gender, and age is not static, but also our gender identity and what people expect of us by gender is not static over the course of our life trajectory. It's okay for a small boy to cry, but probably up to a certain age only, and certainly not as a grown man in very many cultures. So you can see that gender is not just about what we have between our legs. It's about all sorts of other things as well. It's the legs bit, and then another, the color, and then the religion, and the nationality, and the age, sexual orientation. All of those are very big building blocks. And to them, we can add socioeconomic status. Are rich women and men treated the same as poor women and men when it comes to justice? And for the purposes of our discussion, the status of being a forced migrant. Are forced migrants treated exactly the same as citizens, whether male or female, whether complainants or defendants? So if we understand that gender is constructed and that it looks different depending on which building blocks we've used and at different points in our lives, then we begin to see that for gender-just access to justice, we have to pay attention to and then ensure that we do not allow it to bias us very many different dimensions of a person's identity. Why does our capacity to both see the gender differences and then to make sure that they do not result in gender bias, why does that matter so much? I just have a number of suggestions, and I imagine there are further reasons why it matters, and I hope that they will come out in our discussions. One is just the basic principle of justice as fairness, and that we enjoy equal treatment in the eyes of the law. In a more utilitarian way, there are very high costs associated with the biases that we have in the system as it stands. There are high costs to individuals, and then there are direct ripples. Those costs ripple outwards from the individual who is caught in a gendered justice system to his or her family, and then into their community and beyond. And that's just while a justice process is ongoing. In the longer term, we can see how the impact of a gendered justice system that is not functioning very optimally can then result in a lot of other issues. Widespread mental health challenges, learning difficulties. Imagine those kids whose parents are locked up for indefinite periods of time, who are unable to pay school fees, and they lose their place in the system. They delay. Maybe they never get back in. That's what I mean by learning difficulties. Poverty-related criminality. Your parents are locked up for indefinite periods. We've heard about this in day one. What do? You go on the street, because that's the only way you can get some money. At a more systemic level, what is the cost of the loss of credibility of the formal justice sector? And tied to that, a loss of faith in the whole governance system of a country. If the justice system does not work in a fair way, do you believe in any other part of the governance system? I think personally that there is it's like a domino effect. And the justice system is right at the heart of that. So if that bit, the domino falls, many other bits fall as well. And the messaging. Does it matter if the message of current practice is that each individual's chances within the legal system are largely defined by their gender? Does it matter if the message of the current practice is that each individual's chances within the legal system are largely defined by their gender? And I would suggest that we at least need to entertain the idea that it does. In conclusion, what I believe we shall uncover this morning is that access to justice is profoundly gendered. It's the very opposite of gender just. It is not gender justice. It is not gender just for complainants, nor is it gender just for defendants. What we shall also learn, I think, is that our justice institutions, and I'm not just talking about Uganda here, but our justice institutions are profoundly shaped by the gender norms of our societies. That's why we have more male police, more male judges, more men pursuing corporate law, more women pursuing human rights and refugee law. That's a reflection of gender norms. And that, in turn, we shall see that the institutions of justice consolidate and perpetuate those very unequal gender norms. When you deny justice to a widow who has had the property she lived on for years while married stolen from under her feet by her male in-laws upon the death of their brother, you're perpetuating an entire gender structure, an entire set of gender norms. When you scoff or laugh at the man who tries to complain to police about being the victim of intimate partner violence, you're not just perpetuating stereotypes of male invulnerability, you're also perpetuating the notion that women have no agency to harm other people. In other words, gender norms construct institutions, and then in a kind of cyclical way, those institutions consolidate and perpetuate the norms that gave birth to them in the first place. What I hope and believe our discussion will bring home to us is that gender just justice is not simply the outcome in court. It is not simply the verdict or the ruling. It's the whole process. It's the whole process, from a person's initial decision about whether or not to even try and pursue a matter, whether that be through cultural systems, through alternative dispute resolution, or the courts. It's from that, it's to how these systems listen or do not listen, to how they handle the person while the process takes its course, to the impact that handling has on those associated with the immediate parties to a case. And finally, why this all matters is that if we don't break that cycle of norms constructing institutions that in turn consolidate norms, we shall never arrive at gender-just access to justice. And while we fail to have justice, we shall fail to have peace. And while we fail to have peace, we shall continue to have refugees. The future of refugee management, in short, and particularly the prevention of refugee flows and the possibility of repatriation, which we talked about extensively, cannot be looked at without putting the discussion about gender just and gendered justice right at the center of our thinking. Thank you very much.